Welcome to the Funnel Reboot Podcast with your host, Glenn Schmeltzley. Let's get into today's show.
Hey, Glenn here. Welcome to Funnel Reboot. At the time of recording, this is a new year, and we're going to take a new look at privacy. So let's get straight into today's show. If you go to Wikipedia and type zero-sum game, it'll describe it as, quote, a situation that involves two sides, where the result is an advantage for one side and an equivalent loss for the other. In other words, player one's gain is equivalent to player two's loss, with the result that the net improvement in benefit of the game is zero. Many think that that's how privacy regulations are affecting marketing. Anytime client privacy is upheld, it's at our expense. We're losing, they're winning. Zero-sum game. My guest today disagrees. She says you can effectively market to your client in a way that does right by them and is privacy compliant. She calls herself a protector of privacy, while also being a marketing consultant and the founder of a marketing agency. She has over a decade in the measurement space, having created CXL's course on personalization. She's also been a speaker at conferences like Superweek and the Copywriter Club. She also writes on privacy and marketing on her blog and is host of a podcast whose name is spelled out in the show notes, but which I'll call Marketing Unf. She is currently enrolled in the Master of Laws program, Privacy, Cybersecurity, and Data Management at Maastricht University. When she's not pushing these boundaries, she loves to get outside and test her physical limits. Let's go now and talk to Siobhan Solberg. Siobhan Solberg, welcome to Funnel Reboot.
Thank you, Glenn. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So I want us to find out everything that you have to say about privacy and data governance. I think we are only having this conversation because there are some problems that have cropped up over the years in how marketing is done and how people's information is not being used in the most privacy conscious way. Would you care to tell me what you think is wrong with the way we do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, when we think about the 90s and the kind of heyday of ads and everything, we just went a little bit overboard when we're talking about marketing. And we have decided to collect everything, track everything, target everything, and do with everyone's data what we thought we wanted to do, which usually in our case meant making more money. And as we all know, that eventually got out of control. Some classics are obviously Cambridge Analytica, Facebook, the whole thing, which is one of the reasons. It's obviously not everything, but it's one of the reasons why privacy regulation, data protection regulation started becoming a talking point and started becoming necessary. I think that ultimately, if we would have been ethical about our data use and other people's data use, this wouldn't have come up as quickly, but it has. And that's why we're here talking, right? So
you mentioned regulations, and you're based in Europe. I'm in North America. Can you, from where you sit, tell me how entities like the European Union look at privacy and what they were attempting to do with regulations such as GDPR?
Yeah, I think that the GDPR generally was just trying to protect and put some rules around what was going to happen with your personal data. So the GDPR doesn't actually deal with the cookies and all of that. It was really about personal data and how you are going to retain that data, when you're allowed to collect it, how you need to get consent. And their reason is because there was so much being collected that they needed to put some regulation around it so that the person whose data you were collecting had some control over it. That was essentially the gist of it. It's a comprehensive regulation, so there's a lot to it. We can't break it all down now. But in addition to that, or actually before the GDPR came around, there was also, or is still, the e-privacy directive, or some people like to call it the cookie law, which is, I think, what probably annoys marketers a little bit more. That is some of where the consent banners come from. You're not allowed to put cookies or fingerprinting or local storage or any of that kind of tracking without certain consent. There's a lot of interplay between GDPR and e-privacy directive, but those two have kind of caused all that regulation. In the EU, in America, it's a different story.
Well, yeah. And the way I've heard it characterized, tell me if you disagree, is that in the EU, at least in the last couple of years, they have worked from the premise that when someone goes on to a company's website, that all information and governance of information must be, stated by that company. It's like an opt-in world, right? Like, you don't have any rights to my data unless you tell me what you're doing. It's flipped in North America, where predominantly the assumption is I can take your data and do with it what I want, except for the things that I tell you I will, pinky swear, be good about and restrict myself from. You agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And when I have to give a very general comparison, it's opt-in versus opt-out. And there's just a different way of approaching it. And I think as the users become and people generally become more aware of what's going on, then it won't even matter if it's opt-in or opt-out, because the ones that care will opt out. But yeah, they're very different approaches, which makes people like mine job really annoying. Because we're always trying to stay on top of it. But it's also, I think, culturally, it makes sense that we have these different approaches. I don't think in the States we could have done it as opt-in.
Okay. All right. But that point that you made, and this is a big one, is that those who care will say no, thank you. So whether it's they decline an opt-in or they, take an action to forcefully opt out, that leaves a gaping hole in our marketing. Like, if we have just been riding along on the assumption that we know everything about our customers, both things that they explicitly told us, things that we heard from third parties, all of the above, it kind of breaks marketing. It kind of makes it so that we can't do our jobs. And that I know, a very North American mindset, but this is what people are going to be throwing back at you when they hear you say, well, people will just opt out. So what's the answer if are we just at this impasse and we just lose that whole segment of our audience?
I don't think it's such a big deal, but let me explain.
Tell me why.
Because I think, as anyone who works with data knows, data is not accurate anyway. It is useful. It's not accurate. And to have a little less accurate data when it comes to individual users, I don't think is going to affect us negatively, because you still have a big picture. You still have an understanding of what's going on. And that's still going to allow you to run campaigns, understand what your users are doing, understand their behaviors online, to optimize them. So I don't think that we're losing everything. It also allows us as marketers to maybe think of different ways to do what we need to do. We used to do a lot of contextual marketing, and that kind of disappeared when we all got lazy and we're like, oh, here, just, click this, click that on Facebook and it'll target whatever. If we can do contextual marketing with opt-out users, because we know what page they're on. So there are other things we can do. I think it's not necessarily a negative for marketers. I think it's a chance for us to think about how to do things differently, how to be a little bit more innovative about how we are marketing, and how we can do that while still respecting the user. And in the long term, I think it's going to be win-win.
So I love that, you're including on this kind of think a new way. Some of those new ways are rather old school. Contextual marketing Like we've had that since, we were doing media plans and picking what magazines and direct mail lists people could see us in. So I love that. But the other image that you've kind of given me, looking at, let's say, the worst offenders in a North American context is, those TV shows where they go in like a reality show and they're looking at a person who is a hoarder and their house is completely filled with a ton of stuff. But it's like the TV crew and the people that are going in, it's obvious to them, but the person who lives in that house, they're really perplexed. They don't understand why everybody is telling them they have too much stuff. Are you telling us that we can get along with less data than we think we need? Are we
100%.
hoarders?
You're hoarders. Yes.
Oh, no.
I will tell you that most people working with data or thinking that they depend on data are hoarders. I mean, I used to be in marketing and specifically in data, and I did this all the time. Oh, but let me just collect this just in case I need it. Or you know how it goes. Oh, but in 2 years, I might require that. Or let me have it so I could do a year over year analysis for the next 5 years. But realistically, did we ever do that? No. There's always these stories, but I remember a client telling me, oh, we need to collect phone numbers. We need to collect phone numbers. And I remember asking him, have you ever called anyone? He's like, no. Will you ever call anyone? He's like, of course not. I'm like, so why do we need a phone number? So it's just, we were so in tune to having everything because we could easily and cheaply get everything that I feel like we've become lazy. And that's not a good thing. It's allowing us not like it's setting us back because now we're not thinking about different ways to do things. Now we're not thinking, oh, wait, I have this and this. I can make this work. Instead, we're thinking, let me just get everything and find the easiest way. So, I mean, the question I always ask people now is, if you can tell me what you're going to use the data for and what action it's going to drive, then let's collect it. Otherwise, forget it. And it's going to give you so much clarity in the end, isn't it? I mean, it's like a hoarder, right? The moment you can see your kitchen, you'll know what to do in your kitchen. But before that, forget it. So it's the same with data.
Yeah, excellent point. Yeah, that's true. That's right. You just rather order in than contend with, I don't even know where to find a plate or, nothing's clean. You have, I think, a bit of a philosophy around this. Don't you call this data minimization?
Yeah. So I talk about this a lot, don't I? Data minimization is essentially this principle of the GDPR, but it's actually included in a lot of ideas also in US privacy regulation.
Okay.
About data minimization is not, it's multifaceted. So we'll just go into this one aspect of it. Ultimately, you need to have a purpose and a reason to collect what you're collecting. So, and then when you are collecting it, minimize it as much as you can, right? So you don't need a whole IP address. You can survive with the first two parts of it. So, it's a way of eliminating risks when you get breached, because it's not an if anymore. And at the same time, understanding that you do need to be able to market and have campaigns. So there are actually like 3 principles that work together with this, which is purpose limitation, storage limitation, and data minimization. And all 3 of those combined allow you to really think about what data you need to collect, why you're collecting it, and how you're going to keep it. And I think if marketers and people working with data would think about that more, it's going to very quickly sink in what's required and what's not. Because the moment you have to define what you need to do with something, it makes you think about what you're going to collect. And if nothing else, if we just think of that on a daily basis as marketers, I think we'd be a lot better off already.
Yeah. It presupposes that we know when we're, for example, setting up Google Analytics and we're looking at that data retention screen. It presupposes that we and the rest of our marketing team are functional and forward-looking, and that we actually have a clue what we might need 14 months from now. So there's discipline required, right, to make that true. But it's a fair question, right? Don't we know what we're doing? Why don't we know what we're doing with this data?
Yeah, I think it is a fair question. And I think more importantly, if you're not sure, then don't hesitate to ask someone. Because if you ask your data guy in your company or the lady who is implementing all your GA4 setup, she'll very quickly tell you, you've got all that data in BigQuery anyway.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if you have it for 2 or 14 months. It only matters if you're using the GA4 reports. And let's be realistic, most of us aren't. So, I think it is very easy to make that mistake. And you're right, because as marketers, I think there's a lot expected of you, and you forget that you can't be an expert in everything. So then it's just a matter of saying, okay, this is not I can't figure this one out. Let's find someone who can actually answer this question. But I think that's a really hard thing to do for marketers. And I respect I really admire the ones that do this, because it is one of those fields where we're all expected to know everything, right? You're supposed to know how to collect data, the PPC campaigns, Facebook, social media, influencer marketing. You're supposed to know it all. And that's just not fair.
Right.
Right. So I think that if we can get to the point where we say, this is our position, this is our job, I'm good at content marketing, I'm not going to mess with the GA4 settings, then the person that does understand it can do it. Maybe that's a good thing for marketing.
Well, you got to draw the line somewhere. And I love how you've said it. To me, it seems that the marketer, who is always responsible for these things, should at least be able to ask the question, right? So, yeah, you may not know, like you just incorrectly pointed out, that BigQuery will hold on to all that information. There's also the GA4 API, which someone can go into after the fact and go get information. Some people might be listening to this going, I don't even know what those things are. It doesn't matter. The point that Siobhan is making very well is, as a marketer, go to the person who could get you the data and ask them, what are we collecting? It may begin a conversation where you enlighten them on what you might need and what you don't need. And based on that, they'll know how to change settings. And again, things like a data breach are never fun. And you don't want to find out after the fact that you were holding on to information that really is now a liability, not an asset. So, right. But you have to have enough confidence to ask the question, even if you don't technically understand why or how they do it.
Yeah. And I think that's the hardest part, right? It's a matter of being also allowed by wherever you work to ask that question. And to step outside of some of those silos that you might be encountering. I mean, I never thought that getting into privacy and marketing that I would talk this much about silos, but I feel like I'm talking about it all the time, because I think one of the big things that are holding us back is not being able to have very freely this conversation with the legal team, with the data protection officer, with the privacy analyst, with the data analyst, the BI team. You need to be able to have those conversations across the board, because then you're going to be able to set it up right and create a system and a culture that's going to support the regulation without hindering your growth. But if you're stuck in these silos, you really are stuck, and it makes it very hard to step out of them and make it work. So yeah, I don't know why I talk about silos so much.
It's depressing, but we do have to contend with it. The other thing I think that is a great compass point that you point out when you're talking about data minimization is keep it focused on the customer. Like the tracking and the targeting that you're going to be using this information for ultimately is about them. So you have this important relationship with them, one hopes, and that's a great litmus test just to say, well, do I need this information because I would be positively impacting my relationship with them? And if you can't say that it's positively impacting it, right? ...
Yeah. I mean, I think the question I always ask people to say is, how would you feel if that was your data?
Turn it around. Yep.
Exactly. When you turn it around, it becomes really clear. I think it's important to remember it's not your data to play with. It's their data that they're letting you use and analyze and learn from. And just put yourself in that situation, because you can ask most marketers I know, most privacy people, obviously, that I know, and most data people I know have ad blockers, say no to everything. And this is our job, right? We're depending on that data, but we're the first ones to shut it all off. So think about that. If you're not comfortable giving most companies your data to work with, think about what you're doing with someone's data. I think it's just very easy to forget. So flipping it around really does help.
Yeah. I want to get us into maybe a few of the wider things that are going on, what maybe the future looks like for this. But we're going to take a very quick break before we do that. Do you have a lot of company data in reach, but struggle to get useful business insights out of it? Do you open up your Google Analytics, but find you're at a loss on how to get it reporting the way you want? Do you wonder what new marketing strategies you could leverage if you could just unlock what's in your data? If you said yes, then you sound just like other clients did when they started working with me. Many B2B companies who I've done project work with have been helped by modernizing their analytics. Let's talk about what you would like your analytics to do for you. Please reach out today via the podcast feedback channels or connect with me, Hey Glenn S, 2 N's on Glenn, on either Twitter or Instagram. Or search up Marketing Analytics People on LinkedIn. I'm usually the first Glenn that pops up. Okay, let's get back to the show. So just before we were talking about how we as marketers and people in the marketing team can work on this, you alluded to the fact that there are others in our organization. I think some of them are maybe friends on this matter. Maybe some are foes. For example, I think whenever I've had conversation with sales teams just, railroad ahead with the get all the information you can. I need it all, So maybe they're not the best ones to talk to, but where would you look in your organization for people who maybe do understand and are maybe allies in the effort to just keep the information that we need for users' privacy?
I think finding champions for this is tricky because they can be in any department. I think it most of the time comes down to the person, not to the department, which is why it's a tricky answer. Most places you can find someone is the data team. Think about, data engineering, BI teams, data analysts. You can usually find 1 or 2 people there who are already actively keeping this in the back of their mind. Obviously, if you have any privacy officer, data protection officer, or a legal team member who is specifically focused on this, it's good to have a conversation with them because a lot of privacy people don't come from a legal background necessarily. So you'd be surprised. They might be an ex-marketer, and then they can have that conversation with you differently. And going to your managers, because remember, it's not if we want to do this, you don't have a choice anymore. You need to get it in check how you work with data. So sometimes talking to your managers is a good way to open that conversation because they're already thinking about it, because they're already being told we need to get it together. So they can also be a good person to talk about. But really, I wouldn't hold back. I know of product teams that are really active. So just ask around, find a person. Sales, yes, that's a trickier one. But depending on what they're selling, if the people they're selling to start asking them, well, if we do a data impact assessment, what's going to come back, and are you making sure you're doing this and this with your data? Suddenly, sales will care too, because they'll need to know what to tell them and need to know that you're doing it to be able to sell the product. So it's one of those classic "it depends" answers. But
Sure.
Just ask around; you'd be shocked how many people are into it.
You intrigued me with the data team one. So, if we look at situations where the data team is maybe helping do conversion optimization, I would think that they would want to carry a lot of other dimensions of a user's, properties so that they could end up saying, well, yes, this version did better, but it did better among these types. You say the data team will, for the most part, be on side and actually want to reduce the amount of data. What's their motivation for doing that?
Well, think about it. If you're working at a company that's collecting all the data they can, it is causing a mess for the data team. The moment you collect only the data you need, and I'm not saying don't collect everything if you need everything. So they can collect all the custom dimensions that they need for what they're trying to do, but it's going to allow them to find that clarity a lot quicker.
Right. And the conversations I've had where that becomes evident is when they say, do you know how long it takes me to run this query to find out the answer to your question? Right.
Yeah.
Because if there are tons of tables that it's strewn across and each table is super duper long, has many, many columns of just junk, then they are actually paying the price in terms of productivity. So you might actually be glad, you may be doing them a big favor. They may be glad. You'll be even more glad because both of you will just get what you need. It's enough.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, you have to remember that most data teams, they know what regulates the data that they're working with. They're very aware of that conversation. So I think they will be the least surprised about you starting a conversation with them.
Yeah. But when we step outside of our organizations, or at least we're talking with C-level management who are looking across at the broader picture, I sometimes worry that they get the idea that there still is a lot of information that, we should be pack rats with. You mentioned Facebook earlier. Facebook, Google, the other Silicon Valley giants have not slowed down on acquiring data. I mean, their answer to privacy is, yes, privacy should be practiced by everyone else. We should hold on to all the data, but you should not. And you need to come to us and buy it from us in order to, work in a privacy safe way. I'm being cynical, but that is, I think. So when that kind of mentality permeates the market, I can't help but think it gets us into this arms race of, okay, well, a lot of data is still being collected. The people who are deprecating cookies are figuring out something that's probably going to do roughly the same thing as cookies did because they're driving the bus on that, right? And that's their business model. So, what do we do when we contend with the outside world, which is kind of going, it seems, in the opposite direction of what you're telling us to go in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair point, right? And if you look at some giants like Facebook, their whole business model is to make money off of data. So you can imagine the battle that they're fighting. It sounds funny to say this, but they're essentially trying to survive, right? Yes, they're still making billions trying to survive, but they're still trying to survive. And believe me, especially in the EU, they are trying every angle, and their lawyers are trying every angle to make this work for them. But there are consequences to that. But I don't, and this is a personal opinion, but I don't think that we should be running our businesses according to what the top 3, 4 businesses are doing. Because number one, we're not going to get there. That's a pipe dream. And secondly is they're going to crash and burn. That model that they have is not sustainable. And I'm talking long term. I'm not talking tomorrow. I'm not talking even the next year or two.
No, but one thing I've heard about Facebook, and it makes perfect sense, is they're a publicly traded company. They are trying to, as you say, monetize information on their user base. But they're pretty much at the stage now where they have brought most of the internet-enabled world onto their platform. So they're topped out on that. And it should do double-digit growth quarter over quarter from there. Not tenable. So your point is perfect that, who knows, crash and burn, or just maybe kind of wander off in terms of, becoming less significant. But they are not the torchbearer for, how things should go in the future. They won't be as big in the future as they have been in the past.
They won't. And I mean, the other thing to point out, and I think this is something that's really important, that data protection regulation is not, I want to separate it from ethics.
Okay.
So, because I am very much pro data ethics and I'm very much pro, privacy. But it's not necessarily the same thing. If Facebook figures out a legal way to collect your data with your consent and use it and even sell it, then they can do that because legally they can do it. Does it make it right from an ethical standpoint? You have to ask yourself that, right? Because ethics is not black and white. But if they can figure out how to do it legally, what are you going to tell them? No. Now, they haven't figured it out yet, but they're trying to, right? They're floating all sorts of models.
Right. And bringing back to that core of you saying it's the user's data, one model that I've heard, if we assume that data has a value that is greater than 0, it may be possible, if most of the world agrees to accepting payments for a company like Facebook to use their data, then we have ourselves a working model. And right, that's not, I love what you said about the difference between the working of it and the ethics of it, because sure, if everybody is okay with taking payment, if I look back, we talk about some of the oldest professions in the world being things where people take payment for things that we didn't consider to be for sale. It's not crazy to think that perhaps personal data may become one of those things that is simply brought back to the party who gave it in the first place.
There's a company already doing this. There's a company doing this already. They're called Caden. I think they're New York based.
Okay.
And it's fully anonymized and everything, but you can essentially download their app and you can let them have limited access to various other apps, Uber, Netflix, things like this.
Right.
And they collect that data and they sell that data and they pay you for it. So the amount of points in data that you give them every day gives you money. And it comes out to, $40 a month or something like that. But they're already playing with that idea that your data is worth something. It should still be respected, right? It should still be anonymized or pseudonymized and protected.
Yes.
But that data also has a value to other companies. So that value should be compensated. So this is already being played with, which is something nice to look into. I'm still waiting to see how that's going to work out. But I think it's a cool idea.
Would you say in general that the future of privacy isn't fully written yet, that there are still things that will develop in this area that we should be continuing to watch because it could take some really interesting turns yet?
I think 100%. Yeah. Especially with AI, the AI Act in Europe coming out and how we are even doing our jobs. And I think there is so much that can still happen. The US, not even half the states, I don't think, have a privacy regulation right now. So they're still trying to figure out how to make that work. And then how are they going to make it? I still don't understand how they're going to make it work. We can't have 50 different privacy regulations. So,
no. And by the same token, we got to be careful we don't fall into this thinking that says what someone's fundamental rights are depends where they live, like the actual ground, that they occupy and what jurisdiction that sits in. If it's a right, it's a right. So
exactly. So I think there's still a lot happening there, and I think in Europe and the States, there are a lot of discussions about this. There's a lot of trying to understand what this all really means. And they're still trying to figure out what they can regulate, what they cannot regulate. There are different acts that just came out that are trying to deal with regulating kind of the big search engines and the Facebooks, the Googles, Bing, all these people. So there is still so much happening, so much changing, and so much discussion happening at a political level that it is going to constantly change. It is part of the reason I chose this job because I love the challenge of constantly changing. But it is something we'll need to, I think as it changes, we'll need to learn. And we have to remember technology usually changes a lot faster than regulation and laws. So the technology will change and then the laws will catch up. And we're going to be playing that catch-up game the whole time.
Yeah.
So you can't, if the technology you're working with or working in is changing, you need to watch out for that law catching up and making adjustments.
Well, sure. But I'm also hearing you say that if you wait for the regulation to come along, the pain of switching to the way that they want you to do it is probably worse than if you had just stayed up on this. If you are following best practices and using the newer technologies, then you're probably good by the time the regulation says you must do it.
Yeah, exactly. This is where ethics come into play, right? If you're going to be ethical about what you're doing,
you're above the bar.
Likely, you'll end up falling within the regulation, or at least to an extent. But doing something ethically is a choice. Doing something by the law is not.
Well, it's also the, act of commission versus the act of omission. If I'm right, if I'm dragging my feet on putting in, like you said, consent management, I'm dragging my feet on doing that already. I could be actually causing harm by what I have not done. So I think you put it perfectly when you said this is always changing. You need to acknowledge that and keep making changes with it.
Yep.
And one last thing on the front of how these technologies are neither good or bad. I've heard that with AI, data teams are actually able to get along with far less individual personal data because synthetic data is coming to the rescue, and they can, widen what they are looking at for making a model with using non-existent people.
Yeah, synthetic data has become a big conversation point because being able to model on your user's data and then using that as if it is your data also allows you to work with your marketing platforms such as Facebook. So there's an agency, a company in Germany, I believe, who are doing this where you essentially, if you don't get consent from somebody, you still know that person didn't give consent. Because that much you understand. And then they essentially create a synthetic profile, slip them in, and then they still know, and if that person came from a Facebook ad, they can just create a fake user that goes and they can still send it back. So it actually makes their marketing more valid because you're actually pushing all of the information back, but you've never touched that user's data. So synthetic data is something that a lot of people are talking about, but within a marketing perspective, this is just a really cool way of doing it, right? To be able to still understand how your campaigns are performing and how things are working for you without disrespecting the user's data that wants it out of the picture.
This is kind of taking us back to that. What does a marketer really, have to do in this whole field? You've just outlined another brilliantly creative way that marketers could address this problem. And I would love to think that they didn't even need to know the technicalities of how the synthetic data would make that person who said no. Doesn't matter. They came up with the strategy. Others actually facilitated it. And the role of a marketer, I think, is so pivotal in what we've got going on with privacy. My hope is that you have helped our listeners understand how they still have a very key function in making privacy work while they're still doing marketing.
Yes, 100%. I think without marketing, privacy won't happen.
Oh, I love that. Okay, so we're not the bad guys. Siobhan, if people want to find out more about yourself, about the agency you own, Raise Marketing, where would you send them?
So if you want to know more about my agency, Raise Marketing, you can go to raisemarketing.io. That's Raise with a Z. If you want to find out more about me, go to Solberg. So S as in Sam, Solberg.com. And you will see a lot about what I do in terms of privacy and marketing and a lot about my opinions. Another place I'm very active is LinkedIn, so you can always find me there.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter @Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.